А напишіть, будь ласка, в кімнату очікування, що ми почнемо за 5 хвилин. Alex wrote me that he will join in 5 minutes. Олег, чуєте мене?
Да.
Угу. Запустимо всіх в 10:58. В мене за 3 хвилини.
Окей, хорошо.
I heard from Peter like 20 minutes ago, but I'm not sure where he is now, but probably he just forgot to log in earlier, but he will be there.
We just wanted to ask
Very
Peter,
good comment, Kostya.
We just wanted to ask Peter on the presentation side whether he would like to have some intro to the study from the beginning, or should support start the presentation as early as he starts to speak.
To switch the slide, you mean?
No, not to switch the slide, but if Peter would like to have some kind of an overall intro from Aurora's side.
Yeah, I think that was what he planned.
Then if the slide will be already on the screen, his face will appear like very small next to it, and it will be one slide for all of his intro.
Okay. Yeah, but I think at least like he said, he would make the intro not too long. So, and then he has still the methodological intro. So the next 2 slides on the setup. So I think then it's not like too long on one slide. And I think it's just
okay. So
the way we speak now is already a good one.
Олег, тоді знаєте, як ми зробимо? Ми всіх запустимо, там хвилинку чекаємо, поки люди приєднуються. А потім, коли я почну всіх вітати, казати вітаю, доброго дня, дякую, що приєдналися, почну там з технічного вступу і перейду потім до вступу. Коли я почну ось цю частину, то ми презентацію виключаємо повністю, щоб я була на весь екран. Потім я буду передавати слово іншим, і коли дійде до Пітера, там Пітер почне, і, в принципі, можна буде одразу включати його презентацію.
Хорошо. Это вот этот слайд или...
Ні, з першого. З самого першого, навіть, титульного.
Ну вот у нас титульний.
Але потім ми його прибираємо, коли буду говорити.
Да, я понял, мы убираем. А когда Питер, какой слайд?
Першого, з титульного слайду.
З титульного? Все, понял.
І Пітер скаже, next slide.
Угу.
І тоді ти говориш без слайда, я кажу без слайда, коли ти мені.
Так, а Пітер потім повертається з презентації.
Мы уже пускаем людей, и там скоро начинается уже трансляция, поэтому...
Да. Шановні учасники, учасниці нашої
So,
презентації,
dear participants of our presentation, my name is Oksana Alieva. I am the coordinator for the Climate Change and the Energy Policy Program for Heinrich Böll Foundation into Ukraine. I'm pleased to welcome you at our today's event, and I would like to remind you that we have now joined together for the presentation of the results of the report on the economical outputs of the coal transition in Ukraine up till 2030. On behalf of the foundation and on behalf of our whole team and all of our partners, we're really grateful to all of you for finding the time on this summer nice day to join us online. And we're really grateful for the overall interest of working on this topic of the energy transition and for you working in the sector of energy in Ukraine, because we understand that currently it is a very important topic, and I would even say the hot topic in Ukraine. So before we start and while we still have our participants joining us in our meetings, there are a couple of technical moments that we would like to cover straight away, covering the ideas of how we're going to be working today. So first of all, I would like to ask you to pay attention that our event today is going to be held in two languages, in English and Ukrainian. So please note down at the lower panel of your screen in Zoom application, you might see the globe-like icon that says interpretation. Please make sure that you're going to be choosing the language that you would like to use for the event. So please make sure you're choosing either English or Ukrainian, or if you're not planning to speak up today, so you might stay with the original audio if you understand both languages. But if you would like to comment and if you would like to make sure that you are going to be understanding the languages used, please make sure that you're going to choose the channel so that you would not overlay for the language of others people, and so that other participants will be able to hear you in a proper language as well. If you do not find the interpretation globe icon on the lower panel, it means that your program, your application, Zoom, is not updated to the newest version. So please make sure that you will update it. We can do that in a fastest way right now, but just to make sure that we'll have the interpretation and you'll have the opportunity to ask the questions and to communicate with the team that has made the research in any language that is comfortable for you. So what is the reason for us to be having this presentation today? The idea of the research that has been conducted on the economical implications of the phasing out of the coal in Ukraine, the idea is not the new one. The idea has already been discussed. I think we had discussed this idea for around a year ago, when the pandemic has captured the world, and it wasn't really clear for us what can we do next. We didn't understand what should we do next in, first of all, speaking about the economical restoration for all of the economical sectors, and on the other hand, we understand that the intergovernmental group on climate change has already spoken that the greenhouse gases emissions should be decreased in the most significant way in the nearest 9 years up till 2030. So we have to decrease the overall emission as much as possible just for us to stick to the overall scheme of the global heating on the level of 1.5 degrees. And we have discussed what kind of steps we can do in order for us to hold to this global temperature levels and how that can be considered the green transition as well. Our assumption was that if we will phase out the coal generation and if we will try and make a transition to the green energy, it can fit those two prerequisites. And basically, the research that has been conducted, the research that is going to be presented to you today, it is once again the test out of the hypothesis that we have used. I would like to pass the floor right now to our partners, to Konstantin Krnitsky, who represents the Akodia NGO. They have been working on the longest period of time in the topic of the fair energy transition in Ukraine, and they have been the ones that helped us to build up the discussion on what way we can build our work in this direction. And in what way we can build up the request for the research for us to have the best and the most profitable research for Ukraine. So Kostya, floor is yours. Thank you. Thank you, Oksana. Well, first of all, I would like to say that the results of the current research are very important not only for the national policies, but also for the local policies as well. And one of the topics that ECODIA has been coping with for last years, at least, this is the topic of the fair transformation of the mining regions after the coal mines are going to be closed. We're working with 9 communities, mining communities in Donetsk region that have got together 2 years ago when they have created the Sustainable Development Platform. So they got united around the idea of the sustainable development of the region when the phasing out of the coal will start. With the support of the local NGOs and local authority, there's always this first question: how much will it cost? How will it impact the economy? Whether the new jobs will be created? What will be the social support for the miners that will lose their jobs? Those are very precise, very logic, and very relevant questions to answer. So I do believe that this is why this kind of research is definitely very important for the representatives of the regions that are going to be mostly affected. It gives us the very specifics that sometimes we lack, and it gives us the additional arguments that this is phased out. And this transition, yes, it might be painful, but if planned properly, it might create the new opportunities for the development. Thank you. Thank you, Kostya. So we are slowly getting to the main part of our presentation and the report itself. And the research itself has been provided by Aurora Energy Research, a German-based organization that has been selected last year to conduct this work. We have almost all of the team of the research team that has been engaged in this work is present right now with us on this call. So what have they done? They have created the modeling of the energy sector, the macroeconomical modeling, and they compared the two scenarios. The two scenarios that are almost opposing scenarios, the inertias, and this is baseline scenario, the business as usual scenario. And the second scenario that has been compared is the transition scenario. For us, what we are always emphasizing, and it's not forecasts, that what we're saying all the time, those are not the forecasts for the development of the energy sectors of Ukraine. No, it's about modeling. It's the research that shows the options, but in between those two options, there are as well the multitude of different variants possible. So basically, there might be very different realistic options in Ukraine. We have chosen these two scenarios and some of the assumptions that we've had. And in order to present this part of our research and presentation, I would like to invite the representatives of our research team. And I would like to say that the work was really hard and it has been done in a more of a scientific research manner. So that is why we would like to encourage you to get a bit more of details in the full report. And the full report with this presentation is available at the Heinrich Bells Foundation's page. We will send you the link in chat. You can open the full research, take a look at it, read throughout it. We're going to present only the key results right now in the framework of presentation. There's much more results in the full version of the research, so you can read it out. Please make sure that you will write your questions in chat throughout the presentation. And after each of every block that we would like to have, after we will present the results in a certain block, we will try to cover the questions that you would like to outline in the chat. After the presentation, we will also have the opportunity to discuss the results that we have seen and to answer the questions if they haven't been covered yet. Right now, I would like to pass the floor to Peter Baum, who has, again, together with the team, the research team, has provided a lot of efforts and a lot of work in order to make this research possible. We're really grateful to him, and we're really grateful to Peter and to all Aurora team for this tremendous impact and tremendous work that you have done. So Peter, I pass the floor to you, and we are all eager to know, to hear the results of your research, please.
Thank you very much, Oksana, and also from my side, welcome to everyone. I'm glad to see that many people have joined, and it is a topic of great interest, I think, around the world, and what will happen with coal energy, and how this can look, how can a future can look different and better for the climate, let's say greener. First of all, of course, also thank you to Oksana and the Bell Foundation for supporting the study and pushing this important topic forward. And we were very, very happy to be working on such an important and interesting topic. As mentioned already, the study is looking at a coal exit and what that on the one hand means for the power sector and how this can look different in the future, and on the other hand, what are the macroeconomic, what are the economic implications of such a thing, what are the costs, but also the benefits and the new opportunities that are being created. I think we can go to the next slide. Next one, please. Next one, please. Thank you. Again, as mentioned, we have looked at two scenarios in general. One as the baseline scenario, the business as usual scenario, which is basically no change or very little changes over the next 10 years. The other one is a swift closure of coal, as you can see on the left side, going from from 17 gigawatts down to 0 in 2030. And a rapid build out, especially of renewables, solar and wind, but also biomass and an addition of battery storages. These two scenarios are very, very different, and as Oksana said, are on the opposing end of the spectrum. But in between is a big, let's say, opportunity space of different things that can materialize and different solutions that can be found. So I think it's important to look at it in a way that this really shows what is possible and how the impacts could look like, but it's not a prescription that it has to be done this way. In terms of the modeling, we did this in 2 steps. First, we did a power sector optimization model, so a dispatch model. So basically, we modeled each year on an hourly basis what mix of energy sources can meet demand at an economic, let's say the cheapest possible way, there we get results as how do capacities look like, what are the investment needs, how are CO2 emissions evolving? Obviously, one big question when we're looking at the topic of climate change, but also what needs, for example, as I mentioned, what flexibility is needed if we close coal and introduce a lot of renewables. When I say flexibility, it means power plants or batteries that are able to respond relatively quickly if the intermittent renewables like wind and solar are not producing. My colleague Oleg will be leading us through that section in a moment, and will be giving us more details on the results of the model. In a second step then, we modeled the macroeconomic impacts of the 2 scenarios. That means we looked at what is the impact on public finances, what is the impact on jobs. That means on the one hand, closures of coal mines, it's a big topic, and I think the topic of just transition is definitely one that is an important one in terms of policy considerations and what to be done, but also in terms of what are the system costs, what are the investment inflows. So we'll be looking at the macroeconomic impacts. My colleague Ivana will be leading us through this part later on. But before we get into the details, I think one really important part is to consider we've modeled, let's say, the technical and economics, but also what policies, what are the takeaways, what are the things to think about and consider in this process. And my colleague Maren will give us a bit more in a minute on, let's say, the takeaways and the things to be considered in the whole process. With that, I'll stop and hand over in a second. I look forward to sharing the research with you, and also to have a discussion and hear opinions from your end. So I think next slide, please. And one more, please.
And
Maren.
with that, yeah, hello also from my side. And as Peter has already presented the assumptions and the setup of the stories, I would just tell you about the three most important takeaways that we found, and that we will dig deeper, as Peter has already said, in the later points of our discussion. So first of all, what our study has shown is that a coal phase out is technically feasible. And so stable electricity supplied in all hours of the day can be ensured while transitioning to a high renewable electricity system. And what we found in the study is also that we have huge overcapacities at the moment in the Ukrainian electricity system, and therefore coal can be reduced like first without any major effects. However, the later we get into the system, more and more flexibility is needed. And this is something that Alex will lead to or will guide us through later. Then what we said in the study design, we also took the second step and looked into the economic effects of the transition. And of course, there are, especially like the coal regions, the regions where the mines are located, are impacted by a coal phase out. However, we also looked on the economic benefits. And this is something my colleague Ivana will lead us through. But we could see that more than €1 billion could, like usually would be in the business as usual scenario, would be paid as subsidies, because the Ukrainian coal mines are just not economic at the moment. And if those subsidies are not paid because the coal mines are closed, instead investments in renewables could happen. And this is something that can create jobs, and that also has effects on taxes. And on those macroeconomic and further effects, this is also something Peter will talk us through later. And then the third step of our analysis and of our presentation today is that what Kostya also pointed us to, because the whole transition that many electricity systems in the world are in, this is something that has to be like politically shaped. And therefore, like if you just let the economy happen, you can have unintended effects. So if we want to talk about a coal phase out, which is technically possible, which has can also have economic benefits, but it has to, for instance, account for a just transition policy and to develop policies that take into account the effects that a coal phase out has on regions. But you would want to shape this politically and not just let it happen. And also there are repercussions for the industry, and therefore to guide this transition and have like industrial policy that thinks about those challenges is important. And in order to facilitate this change, another aspect that we would have to look at is also the system planning. So how do we get the flexibilities in, and also who pays for this? Where does the investment come from? And those are the next steps if we want to enhance the coal phase out that have to be discussed in parallel. And with that, I would jump back to step one and hand over to Alex, who will guide us through the analysis that we've done for the electricity market.
Дякую, Марин. Доброго дня, колеги. Мене звуть Олексій Михайленко.
Oh, thank you, Maren. My name is Alexey Mikhailenko, and I have been a local expert on this project. And right now, I would like to inform you about the results of the modeling of our energy sector. The next slide, please.
І ще один, будь ласка.
And another one.
Дякую. Отже,
Thank you. So,
ми не будемо вдаватися в
we're not going to get into really details on how we have built the model, and if you're going to be interested in that, then I think that you can leave that for the second page. We're going to have answering your questions, and in our report, in the broader report, we have described what kind of approaches we have used. What I wanted to draw your attention to would be the differences between these two scenarios.
А можна наступний
Can I have the next slide, please?
Так, супер.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So the main issue for us, what was the overall structure? What was the overall generation structure that has been included in two of our scenarios, and what is the differences for this scenario? For the business as usual scenario on the left, you can see that the traditional generation preserves almost the same with the installed capacities already. Then you can see the same amounts of the nuclear generation, coal generation, the very same. No changes in the capacities of the heating generation and the hydro generation overall. So what we have presupposed for our basic scenario for the business as usual scenario is that there going to be more introduction of the gas stations. This is what Ukrenergo has outlined in there for 10 years already, what they have been already saying about their generating capacities as well. And what would be the most important is this is our conservative forecast on the overall availability of the installed capacities for the renewables. As you might see in 2030, in the business as usual, the solar stations are going to be rising to up 8 gigawatts and wind from 1.1, that's by now up to 4. This is the business as usual scenario. So this is the system that we have modeled for the business as usual scenario. For this transition scenario, just for you to compare to have the full phase out of coal for up till 2030, our transition scenario, it looks like on this graph that you can see on the right, this is the full phasing out of all of the coal generation in this out of the overall structure of energy mix and the full conversion of the heating transmission systems that are being used and the conversion of the coal for biomass. For the transition scenario, we have also left the assumptions about the new gas stations, the new stations of gas generation, because we do believe that even that mostly that's more possible that if there's going to be the political will, then we're going to be installing the very same amount of the capacities here. We didn't presuppose the construction of any kind of new objects of generation that will use fossil fuels. So basically, you might see that 4.6, the one that is in gray color, that you can see that those are the gas using heating power stations that already exist in our system, and we'll just leave in them to work in the energy mix. So basically, we're not investing into the new capacities. So our transition scenario presupposes that we're using only everything available for us in the system. Hydro stations, they're not changing their capacities. There's no new nuclear power plants built because most of the projects that are currently being discussed by Ukrhydro Energy and Ukrenergo, they have a very ambiguous results of the environmental evaluation. So we're not using any new hydro power plants built as well, except for introducing the new power units in Dnistro hydro energy station that is already in the final stage of construction. So you see that most of the increase of the shares in the system is about the solar generation and wind generation. There is a certain increase in biomass generation as well. We are broadening the overall flexibility horizons, and we're building up the flexibility due to the renewables flexibilities. We're going to have the control decrease at some of the energy generation, and through introduction of the batteries capacities and flexible capacity. Can we get back to one slide before? Thank you. Now, speaking about the results. Well, first of all, one of the most important output that the energy system is capable to work, and it can work sustainably, and it can cover the demand for electricity at each of the years that we have modeled. both in the business as usual scenario and in the transition scenario as well. It's quite clear that the structure of the generation is going to be changing depending on the scenario. If in the business as usual scenario, you might see that the overall correlation of the generation is more or less sustainable, more or less the same throughout the decade, and mostly because the demand for the electricity is going to increase, and that we're going to be using most of the capacities that are available for us today. But in the transition scenario, you might see that we can phase out the coal generation fully, but it presupposes certain changes to the energy mix. First of all, we need to have less of basic capacities, basic pressure. You can see that the overall share of the nuclear generation will not be higher than 40%. The wind is going to be the dominating if we're speaking about the renewables, is going to be the dominated renewables. The gas capacities are going to be used as well, but they're going to be used in the limited range. So basically, they're not going to be covering more than 4 or 5% in 2030. So in this transition scenario, the modeling shows us that Ukraine is capable of producing enough electricity for the systems, and in our system, the renewables will be dominating over other types of the energy generation. So we can have the share of coal, we can reach the share of the fossil fuels used in our generation on the level of less than 10%, and we're going to have the low carbon energy sector. Can we have 2 slides? Thank you. Okay, so this is a very brief slide that gives us an outline and shows us the difference on what kind of stations that are going to be needed at each period of time for each 2 years. What should we build and what should we take out of use? On the left, you can see that there's the slide that presupposes the changes in the installed generations capacities. The transition scenario presupposes the significant change. And you can see that we have the coal generation, and you can see upwards the generations that have to be installed in order for us to have the phase out by 2030. You can see that the main emphasis in the renewables is being made for the wind generation, because the forecasts have shown that Ukraine has a very good wind potential. We have a lots of locations that haven't been fully used for the wind generation, and wind technologies are currently becoming cheaper and cheaper. They're more available right now. And in order to have a lower tension for the balancing system, to have a better mix between the wind station and solar stations, this definitely will give us the opportunity to decrease the expenses for the balancing. And just briefly on the batteries, is going to be a very important and popular topic as well. I think that the main batteries, what we have presupposed, that we're going to have 1 to 4, that we're going to have 1 megawatt of capacities to 4 megawatt hours of the battery, and up to 2030, in order for the system to work, we will need around additional capacity, so around 800 megawatts. So basically, the main results of our modeling on the decrease of the emissions, according to the business as usual scenario, the overall emissions are going to be just the same during the next decade, but the transition scenario can give us the decrease by 84% up to 2030, what basically can save us at least the half of all of those emissions till the end of the decade. That is a very significant result, that can be reached even using the currently available technologies. Next slide, please. The main conclusions, the main outputs throughout our modeling of the electricity sector of Ukraine. Well, first of all, the phase out of the coal by 2030, it does not threaten the system stability. The system will be working, and it will be sustainable and stable. All of the available technologies, the commercial technologies right now, they give us the opportunity to have a sufficient phasing out of the coal by 2030. We're not mentioning any kind of expensive technologies are not available for us yet. So everything that is currently available on the market, on the sufficient economical prices, it can be used for our transition scenario. And thank you, Alexei. Oh, can you hear me right now? Yes, we can hear you now. Okay.
Then,
And no sound now again. Can you hear me right now? Alexei, yes, we can hear you. As far as I understand that you're already wrapping up with the energy sector. Yeah, it's just that my headphones didn't work out. I will just wrap it up, if I may, just for me to close this part of the presentation. So in order to integrate the more renewables and to phase out coal, we will need to have a better flexibility in the systems. That means that we need to have lower basic load. And we have to use not only the flexibility for the generating capacities, but we have to use the other types of flexibility. For example, and speaking about the overall emissions, that is a very significant effect by 10 years that we might reach. A very important issue about what will be the price of it, because basically we know that the transition scenario presupposes more investment than the business as usual scenario. We're speaking about 22.5 billion differences in paychecks, but basically it is hard for us to say that in the base as usual scenario, the coal mines will be able to provide their work for the next couple of decades. Still, the most important moment is that higher investment into the power sector, it doesn't mean that we do not have to do that, because we know that this kind of investment, they will trigger a chain reaction for the whole economy of the country. And this is the effect that we also tried to provide and tried to prove in the research of the economical part. So, and my colleagues will tell us more about that. So I'll pass the floor to them. Thank you. Thank you, Alexei. And I think we'll get into the presentation of the next stage of the research, and the research with the impact on the macroeconomical indicators. So Ivana, please, the floor is yours.
Hello, thank you for the floor. Could you please switch to the next slide? Okay, next slide. Another. All right, so in this part of the study, we considered direct economic implications of the transition, namely the direct effects on employment and on the public finance. Next slide, please. Oh, well, no. Let's stick to this one. So we started with the employment, and first with the losses on the side of employment. As you can see in this slide, the mine closures are about to cause the losses of about 35,000 jobs. In this slide precisely, you can see the method that we used. We are closing the mines company-wise, meaning mines belonging to one company close all in the same year. There's one exception. That was a huge company which closed in 2 stages. We were closing them following the hierarchy of efficiency or profitability. So the least profitable was closing first, and it continued to the most profitable closing in the last year. Well, the transition scenario counts with fair compensation for the mine workers on the financial side of the modeling. That is worth to mention. And for now, it is crucial for us to just remember that 35,000 jobs are being lost in the process. We'll come back to the compensation later. Next slide, please.
This might be obvious, but I'll add it. It's only the public mines that we're looking at.
Yes, exactly. Thank you, Peter. All right. So in turn, this transition is about to create about 160,000 new jobs in the renewables sector. Well, you can see in this slide all the jobs all together. So the permanent and the temporary jobs. 44,000 of these jobs that you can see are about to stay past 2030 because those are the permanent jobs. So we have 35,000 jobs lost in the process, whereas 44,000 will emerge in the end of the observed period. So the net effect of transition after the transition period is basically positive. Can we switch to the next slide, please? Okay, so the system costs of the transition. These costs are higher in transition scenario than in the baseline, mainly in result of new installments. So mainly in result of the capital investment that has to be made for the new installments. Operational costs, on the other hand, decrease because they are lower in renewables than in conventional sources. You can also notice that the fuel costs are fluctuating over the period. It is mainly in result of the substitution of coal by biomass in the combined heat power stations. Well, in the end of the day, the effect on finance or on the public finance is positive, even though the effect on system costs is higher. Well, the effect is negative. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so in this slide, you can see the mine-related costs in both scenarios. In the baseline scenario on the left side, we considered the operational costs of the mines on the level of 2016 or 17, which was taken as the, well, we took those expenses or those profits to calculate what the losses might be over the 10-year period that we observe. It is worth to mention that almost all mines back then were unprofitable, and the trend in profitability was rather decreasing, which means that they are likely to become even more unprofitable than they were back then and that they are now, which might add up to even more debt accumulated over the period than we calculated. So if the unprofitability stayed at the same level, they would accumulate about 1.2 billion euros of losses over the 10-year period, compared to $500 million in our study, meaning that they were closing one by one continuously. So the least profitable closing first, meaning the highest losses were basically not accounted for from the beginning. However, we also counted with very generous compensation for the workers, including unemployment benefits according to Ukrainian standards, as well as reskilling costs. And we also counted the cost of decommissioning of these mines in the study, even though they would have to be spent anyways at some point in time. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so now we looked at the other side of the equation, which are the incomes for the public budget. These tax revenue, you can see in this graph that the tax revenues are about to grow in result of transition, mainly due to the carbon tax that we modeled, but also as a result of higher revenue from salary-related taxes, meaning income tax and social security tax. What is also important to mention is the higher level of VAT as a result of higher system costs of the electricity in transition scenario. Okay, can we please switch the slide? All right, so in this slide, you can see the final effects or final economic effects of the transition. The final gain for the public budget is about 6.6 billion euros over those 10 years. Well, it is also important to mention that the demands of the workers are fulfilled and the demand for a fair transition is fulfilled in this consideration that we made, and the fair transition is feasible for the state and even profiting its budget. Okay, can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah, it's Peter's turn.
Thank you, Ivana. What we did after these initial or these direct effects that we see, I mean, we looked at, as Ivana just told us, public finances, but also job creations and job losses from the mining sector. We also wanted to look a bit further. What would be the, let's say, the ripple on effects, the second order effects on the economy at large. And for that, we did a CGE modeling, which is computable general equilibrium modeling, something for macroeconomists. We can get more into this. But basically, what the study here showed is that if you look at from 2020 to 2030, the changes that due to the higher investment, and this is let's say in the more pale colors, so it's the pale yellow and a little bit lighter gray, the additional investment coming into the energy sector, which is very significant, has a positive effect on the economy. That's the first order effect in a way, money that goes into economy that's being invested. But then we see that the second order effect even strengthens or amplifies this effect. And so we see that in the transition scenario, significantly more money is invested, that is then has an even stronger effect. So we have from 12% to 15% in terms of GDP in 2018 figures, and then for the business as usual scenarios, that the total investment is relatively limited, just about 2.4 billion euro, and that is then amplified again through second order effects. What this shows us, I mean, this is a really a macroeconomic model that really simplifies the economy into I think a range of 20 different sectors. But what this shows us, it validates that there can be positive effects, or there are positive effects expected from this investment inflow. So it validates some of the direct impact. A question that is important, and that is also one of the big, let's say, considerations for policymakers, and that what we see in countries around the world that are phasing out a significant coal sector. I mean, we in Germany, the discussion is big. In Southeastern Europe, Greece, Romania, it is a big topic, but also in Canada or Chile, for example. So what's the impact on the different sectors? Could you switch to the next slide, please? And here we see, this is in an aggregated format. In the study, you can find the different sectors broken down a bit further, but we can see that there are positive and negative effects for the different sectors. What's expected is that energy efficient, energy intense sectors might be impacted by this, and then we can see that this is again in terms of policy considerations something to think about, which sectors, which energy intense sectors should be protected and supported, and how can be efficiently supported. But other sectors are benefiting, and we see obviously there is a big opportunity in terms of using the investment inflow to strengthen. We say construction here, but it obviously is a bit more detailed in different categories. So with that, I'd say we can go to the next slide, please. I did not expect this slide for now. Ivana, is this? Thank you.
Yeah, just to conclude on the economic implications part, The system costs will be higher, as you could see in my part, but the long-term effects are positive, and the change is inevitable in the end of the day. So especially with regards to the pandemic and with regards to the losses of jobs, it might be good to consider a significant change right now at the moment, because it might revive the economy. That is all from me now. We can change the next slide.
All right, we can go to the next one, please. So as a last part, and I think this is, let's say, kind of what are the other questions considering such a, let's say, relatively rapid transition and coal closures? What are the considerations that should be made? A lot of it is policy, but it's also, let's say, a question of different stakeholders and yeah, how this can be included. Naturally, we come, so as Aurora Energy Research, the first two questions you'll see are probably what we focus on most of the time is, what's the power system planning? How should the system look like when closing coal? How should it look like 10 years after? What flexibility is required? How can we ensure the security of supply when a lot of the coal has left, and this is a question, and in the transition scenario, if you don't add a lot of gas, what are the mechanisms? How should the system look like? This is also important in terms of giving investors confidence in the system, that you know how it might look like in 10 years time in terms of planning. The second one is connected to this. It's especially relevant for renewables because of, let's say, most of the cost being upfront for renewables. How can you mobilize, especially cheap money? So bigger investors, how can you attract them into the sector? Then the third one is really about getting on board different stakeholders. As we see, there are potentially some winners and some losers in this process. So how do you ensure that it has you get the support of also important stakeholders into this? Then as number 4, I think this is really a really big topic, the just transition. There are negative impacts, especially on the coal regions and the coal workers. How can one help the regions to transition, but also individuals that have been working in the coal sector for a long time? This is a big topic. Another topic is obviously also, to some extent, is there a rise in power prices? And if there is a rise in power prices, how can vulnerable households be supported if power is no longer affordable? From our modeling, the power price would not rise significantly, but this is something to keep in mind. Then the fifth one is really about process, and this is what we've seen across different countries. To get stakeholders and the political buy-in from everyone, what kind of process is being used. Some countries have had something like a coal commission. This is, for example, in Germany, where not just the government made the decision, but different industry players, but also NGOs were involved to really find a solution and look at all the impacts. It's in the end. Really, how can this be shaped in an equitable and fair way? And then lastly, I've alluded to this, together with this transition of the energy sector, there's also a question about industrial policy. Some sectors might experience negative effects. I mentioned the energy intense companies. So are there solutions to protect them from the negative consequences, or is there like something like energy efficiency is a big topic, or exclusion of some levies and fees for these sectors. The other question is, what are the new economic opportunities? So with such a transition, there are obviously opportunities for companies building, investing, installing renewable energy batteries. There are also different business models emerging for managing the flexibility of the grid. And then I think there is now also a bigger question that's probably interesting to look at for Ukraine as well. The EU is considering a carbon border adjustment, so meaning a price on imports from outside of the EU for the CO2. So this is something obviously where the transition would benefit, especially Ukrainian exporting industries. We don't have the answers, and I think this is not to all these questions, but it's really rather to highlight these and say this is looking at the results and looking at, let's say, the movements in that such a transition would cause. What are the things to pay attention to? With that, I think we're through with the presentation, and be very keen on hearing your thoughts. And I've seen there also already a lot of questions, but I hand back to you, Oksana.
Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you. Well, you know what I'm really pleased right now, that the people have been watching this presentation, they have read it out, they have noted out the figures and numbers. It means that we have really invited you and engaged you into this discussion. We're going to get closer to the discussion part right now, and we will try to answer all of the questions that you might have had during this time that we still have. But before that, I would like to note down as well that the work and the research is very complex, and we needed a lot of attention because we needed a lot of the incoming input data and the assumptions that had to be used. And you see that a lot of work a lot of people have been engaged into this working process. For us to be sure that everything will be done in the right way, we've decided to also address at the Center of the Macroeconomical Research in Kiev Economy School to have the peer review for this research to be done. And I would like to pass the floor to Yulia Shalovetsky, the head of the Macroeconomical Research for Kiev for Kiev School of Economy. So please, Yulia, can you tell us, in your opinion, how do you evaluate the research and the work that has been done? Maybe you have some critical comments while you have been conducting the peer review, while you have been reviewing that, and maybe you have some certain recommendations to this research and to something that might be researched later on as well. Good day, ladies and gentlemen. I'm pleased to welcome everyone who's interested in this topic. And before we had this peer review, I had as well my personal points of view of what can we change in this sector, how can we improve this sector, because basically we're lagging behind, and it's always is going to result in our incapability in the recent times, because you can see that there are many opportunities that we might lose out in Ukraine. So definitely this work and this research, it has the overall aim to decrease the amount of the emissions, but there are very important and local things that will help us as well. So basically, I do believe that this research is definitely needed for us to see the perspectives of the local development as well. On the other hand, if we are speaking about the interest for the state and institutions, yes, of course, they are interested in that, but for them it sounds really complicated, because we know about the needed for the budgeting, for the really hard ways to find the needed teams that will be able to do the work of this kind of complexity. And this high level of complexity, it can be seen on how many tools that have been used during this research. That's something that can be noted down as well. Speaking on the modeling, because I was mostly connected to the second stage, to the macroeconomical effects, so our work has been as a coordination with Aurora Research, we've had a lot of commands, and not the kind of a traditional way as what we would say that's basically to the final results, but we've had some processes at each of stage and each of the mid and big stages. So I think that was a very good work that has been done, and our team, we've tried to provide the quality in order to change this aspects to Ukrainian discourse so that we would avoid the problems of the structure of our team. The only compromising point was the problem with the specific data that didn't give us the opportunity to get on to the highest level of details, because basically the very same state statistics service, they publish the data when they have been already used. So they are only publishing this data in a very aggregated case. So it's really hard for us to understand what is the overall structure of generation and what is the main functions, the production functions for that. But still, in the framework of our work, we thought that there's going to be a lot of options for the commissions, and throughout the overall calculated models we have worked out, we have had our we have had additional data provided as well. So I think that work is already even makes a bit better than what the researchers that are familiar with this topic in Ukraine could have done. So the only offer and the only recommendation from our side would be also to collaborate better with the Ukrainian data as well, so we can use the data in the most efficient way, because, you know, the lack of data is a very important thing, because we have heard it in the previous sessions, and we've had this commands specifically that if we're not going to be considering those, then we're kind of decreasing the value of the work that has been done and the research that has been done. But overall, from our side, I would like to say that I am really satisfied with the quality and with the results of the research, and well satisfied with the research as well. Not only with the second part, the macroeconomical analysis, but with the first part as well. We'll try to read it out in details and try to understand it as well. In Kiev School of Economy, we are also discussing the energy sector as well, and we're researching the energy sector as well, and we have a lot of topics of discussions on the structure and the future generation for Ukraine. So thank you. Thank you, Yuri. Thank you, Yuri. And we're really grateful to the overall macroeconomical center team. Thank you very much for joining us in this research. It took a lot of your time and a lot of your efforts as well. So thank you very much for joining us in that. At this stage, I would like to ask us to respond to some of the questions that have already been outlined in the chat. And if I may, I will address those questions. If I will understand who this question will be the best fit into, I will then direct it to the specific people who were responsible to the certain part of the research. And understanding that this question are mostly made in Ukrainian, I will read them out in Ukrainian. And the first question, I think, because the first question is covering not that much of the issues of the methodology or results, but it's a question of the approach that has been chosen and in what you have been researching. I think I will cover this question on my own, because as a foundation, we have been one of the initiators of this work. That was the question of the overall future of the coal generation. So the question was as follows: why haven't you considered the preservation of these enterprises? Because the coal might not only be burned at the heating stations, but you can also have the synthesized gas that we can use as the substitution for the coals, and you can also then use it, for example, the hydrogen generation, and sell it abroad. Yes, we know that the science is getting developed, and the science gives us the understanding as well that the coal generation up till that moment in Ukraine is currently outdated, and the one that requires a lot of investment, either in modernization or in building the new capacities. The new coal capacities in the times of the climate crisis is not that alternative that anyone would like to offer, especially to the Heinrich Böll Foundation. So we see a lot of risks with that. The only thing that might be told about that, it's not that much about the coal generation, but that much as of the mining itself. And that was about mostly the approach that has been chosen in this work. You can see that we have calculated only the state-owned, the public mines and the public enterprises. We have done it on purpose. We have done it intentfully, because we understand that currently we are dealing in a globalized world. And if the market price and now we understand that for the certain time, the private owned coal enterprises are going to be functioning or selling this coal abroad, or they're going to be using that in Ukraine for non-energy needs, for example, in case of the coal generation and coal is going to be phased out. We have the non-energy use for the coal resources as well. But the main factor for us was that the state-owned, the public coal mines, they're already non-profitable. They already require additional subsidies from the state budgets. So basically, we are already paying for that. The taxpayers are paying to support the coal mines right now in Ukraine. So we have considered them unprofitable already. And if the private coal mines, there are still can be profitable and they still can be marketed in the global conditions, then they can continue in existing for some certain period of time. But even though we know that the DTEC company, the biggest miner, that the biggest company that owns the biggest part of the coal mines in Ukraine, they have already announced that they're going to close down all of their mines by 2040. And a very brief comment from my side personally about the hydrogen generated from coal and selling it abroad. That is a very ambiguous note term, because in the European Union there are certain regulations that voiced out the criteria of what kind of hydrogen that should be, and whether it will be offered to export the hydrogen in the framework of the Green Deal and the CBAM and all of the others things that have been announced in the 50 to 55 package that has been offered. And in this case, that seems very doubtful that it will be possible for us to sell the hydrogen generated out of coal. We've had an amount of questions that are being dedicated to the issues of figures. And thank you very much for reading that closely up. And I'm going to be combining a couple of questions if it is possible to do like that. So I think we'll have a question to Ivana first. The question is as follows. In what way have you calculated the historical inflation of Ukrainian hryvnia to euro, and how the overall cost of how the value of money has been calculated over time, and all of the calculations we have made in euro, so that we would have this opportunity, like you've said, whether we calculate the inflation or no. That is why we have calculated it in euro. But still, we have calculated the overall cost of money in time, and Ivana will go into tell you in what way they did it. And it would be a very interesting, 161,000 jobs created. I think that Ivana, you have to tell us a little bit more how you have got this number, because this number is definitely significant.
All right, so starting with the exchange rates and the inflation, we communicated with the expert from the Kiev School of Economics, Yuri Sholomitsky, who basically confirmed the benchmark year, the benchmark year that we took that we took as plausible in our analysis. We counted with inflation as well, and we counted the discount rate of 10% in in the analysis. Now getting over to the jobs, to the employment. The employment.
And if I may, just for a second, because I think it's in terms of the future inflation. So what we did there, we looked at this is an interesting question in that sense, but we took basically real value of the 2019 euros. So the conversion between euro and hryvnia would be constant, but and then inflation for euro or the inflation in the future would then be something that you can calculate differently, but it's in a constant money value. Sorry.
Okay, so now getting over to the employment, we took the employment rates from a study which accustomed the employment rates in renewable energy sources construction to the Eastern European markets. So they are a bit higher than they are in the West. At the same time, we communicated these figures with the local industries in Ukraine, so with the Association for Solar Energy, for example, and the values that we found in the research and the values from these associations were kind of matching. So we used those. It is also important to notice that these 161,000 jobs are created in the construction phase. So basically, these are temporary jobs. Only 44,000 out of those are permanent. So they are about to stay past 2030. Yeah, I think that's more or less all to address your question. 120,000 out of those jobs are temporary. They are about to exist for a short period of time, and then they either get reskilled or somehow adjust to the economy, or they simply disappear. That's true. Well, we also find it beneficial for Ukraine that this sudden rise of employment comes post-pandemic, which caused a lot of job losses.
Maybe I think when taking a look at the report, we'll give more details on two elements. Exactly, Ivana, what you said, there's some jobs that are roughly a bit more than 40,000 jobs that are permanently in the sector, and then the temporary jobs. But I mean, we only looked at the time horizon of 2030. So in this end, I mean, let's say at 2031, the world and the energy sector will continue. So these temporary jobs are the construction can continue in this sense. So it's not that they disappear necessarily, but they can. I mean, it's just that the study horizon ends there. Shall we go to the next question?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Ivana, for those comments. Another question that we've had was about the greenhouse gases emissions, and actually mostly asking about how did you get the input data about the sources for the emissions that you've had on slide 10, for example, when we have discussing how we can decrease the emissions. So I think they have considered the data 2018 and 2020. So the question is, where did you get this data from? Another question on emissions of whether you have calculated the numbers on the CHP, the coal heating plants, and if you have considered this number, so where did you get them from as well? I think I might answer to this question, and that would be briefly that the data on the emissions that have been provided to from two sources. The first source, this is basically the data that Ukraine reports to the UN on the register of the emissions. That's what we have been providing as the reports to the UN as well. That was data that has been updated for 2018, and we have used this data just for us to understand the average amount of the emissions for average coal station. The second source that we use for the cross-reference, just to again check out this data, was the reports of the Ukrainian companies that are producing energy. They have they have environmental report. I think quarterly they provide an information about their expenses of the fuels per 1 unit of energy provided. And the third source that we have used for the cross-check as well was the data of the tax services on their payment in the emission tax company-wise, and analyzing the amount of the taxes that have paid, in the tax rate, we have calculated we could have calculated the amount of the emissions as well. This was the baseline data for us to identify the quotients that we might use in the modeling. And then we have been modeling based on this historical data. The second question, Oksana, can you remind me, please, as well? Yes, speaking about the heating plants, how did you use the coal heating plants? Where did you get this data? Where you calculated that as well? Both the gas heating plants and then thermal plants and the coal thermal plants, we have calculated it separately. We had some data of the environmental reports as well that I have already outlined, and we had it in the Ukrainian reporting systems. And yes, we have calculated that into our reports as well and in our research as well. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Alexi. Thank you very much. I think that the next question is something that will be very interesting, not only for the person who has written this question, but for many people as well, because when we speak of money, then everyone gets their attention concentrated. So money. The question is as follows: the cost for electricity. Have you modeled the cost of electricity, the fares for the electricity for industry and for the population based on the green tariff as well? I will comment upon the green tariff, if I may, because if we were speaking of what has happened since now to 2030 in our research, we are considering that even the new installations and new mounting into the system, that they're already, the green tariff is going to be very different for them than the feed-in tariff that has been a couple of years ago. So mostly they're going to be built into the auction system that is going to be established in Ukraine soon, hopefully. So the green tariff hasn't been included into that. But to the other share of the question, please, I think maybe Peter can cover that.
Yes, absolutely. So maybe what we can show here, that there's a differentiation. We didn't, I mean, there is an energy market, and we did not model and look at what the market price would be. So what I don't know, peak prices in 2030 would look like. That's not what we did. But we did, when we looked at the total system cost, what would be the cost of per megawatt hour or per kilowatt hour, as you like, how it would develop. This does exclude these costs would exclude any taxes or any, let's say, discounts for industry, etc. So you see that in the total system costs, and we see a slight increase of prices for on average. How that translates to household and how that translates to industry is not something we looked at in more detail.
Thank you, Peter. I would like to offer us, because we have another question that is concerning the emissions, and we have a couple of questions of a broader sense than the strategical issues. Then I think that we also will use these questions to open the discussion into other level, not in the research, but actually of what can we do next. So I think that I would like to voice out the question about the research and the emissions. Alexander Diachuk, you wanted to speak from voice. Yes, good day. Well, first of all, I would like to thank you for the really good, tremendous work that you have done, and I have got through the report very briefly. So everything looks really great, everything's nice, but there is a question on the missions, and I wanted to actually discuss this issue because basically it has been discussing it a lot on the emissions overall, that basically we have seen that there's all of the emissions that have been already divided and we can see them. But now I see that this picture that's in the previous report, not the final one that has been reported by Ukrenergo, they've had this the structure of generation and the different scenarios, and they also have the evaluation of the greenhouse gases of the based on the activities of the energy sector. In the process of our work, we have outlined that these emissions are calculated solely from this part when only electricity is being produced. For example, if at the heating power plants 60% is being divided to heat and 40% to electricity, then the emissions are only calculated only for the electricity generation. They do not calculate the 60% that of the emissions that are being produced by the heating generation. So what I have seen that in your research as well, and in Ukrenergo as well, then you have around 57 million tons for 2018. This is the number that has been considered in your report as well. So there's nothing that can be changed in the world, but we need to have this comment upon that those emissions that do not include the emissions that are being created and are being provided by the heating generation as well. In my opinion, it's not the right way to introduce the data on the emissions, but Ukrenergo does it like this. Those are only the emissions during the production and generation of electricity, but they're not mentioning the heating production. They're not calculated into this data as well. We have to consider that as well, because the overall the amount for the emissions, and you can see that in the CRF table as well, that's the overall amount of the emissions for both the heating power station and heat generation station, there is slightly higher than the one that we have seen in our numbers. So we have to consider that it's just for the electricity generation. But I don't like this approach, because basically that thermal power station, they have generated 60% of heat and 40% of electricity, and we calculate the emissions only for the electricity production. And still, I understand this approach, and Ukrenergo has been building on this approach, and you have the right to use it as well, but maybe you can write a comment upon that. Thank you. Thank you, Alexander. Thank you for the very good comment. I don't know whether anyone would like to respond to this comment from the side of the team.
I'd comment quickly. Thank you very much. No, that's a very good comment, and I have a lot of sympathy for it, because once you start burning it, then the emissions count for it. But we wanted to be in line with the data. Otherwise, our data would look like this in comparison to Ukrenergo, and it's good to comment on this, I think, in the report.
Чому це просто важливо? Я ж кажу, то інакше треба розрахунки там додатково.
Yes, why I meant it was important, because like basically when you are calculating the CO2 tax as well, I don't know, like you have calculated the CO2 tax in 2030. So you have calculated the CO2 only solely from the energy generation, basically, or you have included, like, for example, for the electricity and gas generation, or you have included the heat generation as well. So you have calculated the CO2 tax from all of these volumes that this market breeds. So I think that you can just add up to the comment to that yes, we followed the Ukrenergo's logics and calculated it based on those data. Thank you.
Yeah. And I think you hint at something else with this comment, that the energy transition is not just a power sector, but also heating and probably also going into e-mobility, etc.
Yeah, but discussion not about heating, for example, district heating, just about CHP. CHP is producing electricity and heat, and in your calculation, emission included only from electricity production, but not from heat production. And it's okay, it can be, but please provide some remarks about this. Thank you. But job is very good. Welcome.
Дякую дуже.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We also have another question on the methodology and understanding that we have taken for more than an hour of time, that I would like to say that the methodology has been detailedly explained. All of these approaches and models that have been used, they are described in the report. And I think that I would like to once again send a link to our full report in the chat. For those people who have joined us later, you might read out the methodology out of that, not to take the time of that. We still have a couple of questions that we would like to cover, and the discussion questions that we would like to cover from the chat. And I think that's why we're going to be discussing that. I would like to remind you that you might use your voice to mention the question, or you can just raise your hand using the Zoom tools available for that. So you can just let us know in the chat, and you can comment or also voice out your question if you want to. The one question that is relevant to everyone in the context of the Ukrainian commitment to the decrease of the emissions in the climate friendly approaches, and then the coal phasing out approach. You might know that the mission of the commissioner from Germany on the energy transition to Ukraine, Mr. Stanislav Kelch, has just ended, and he has already voiced out that 40 billion euro will be needed for the energy transition. In our report and the research, we have seen that the investments needed for the transition is around 28 billion euro. The question is, well, basically given what to what, who will invest this money? Where can you have to take this money from? And I think that this is a very good question. And the author of the question also mentions the problem of the production of the equipment, of how it also might influence the prices and the overall economical impacts. And I think that throughout this answer, maybe we should consider of how did we consider the share of Ukrainian equipment into the further on installation of capacities, and our thoughts of how can we get the money. I make a spoiler to that answer question. We do not have a precise answer how to get this money, but I think we have thought about that a lot. So Peter, Ivana, Maran, Alexei, who would like to start? Who would like to start?
I can start. Alexei, do you want to add to how we consider this? So the first question more on the cost side, and then I'll try to give an answer on where the money could come from. But on the cost side, so we looked at costs currently, and then we applied. So we at Aurora Energy Research, we do modeling for a lot of different markets, and we have, based on different studies, expectations of how the cost will decline for solar, wind, and batteries in particular. And so we applied these learning rates to the current level that we see of equipment being produced in Ukraine. What we did consider is that the bigger the market gets, more of the equipment can be manufactured in Ukraine, so the economic benefit rises over time. Just as the nature of a bigger market makes more sense to have production on the ground there. Alexei, if you want to add to this question, please.
Well, yes, we can add a lot from this side, but the main issues that I think that we should consider and that we should cover is basically that I think that was one of the questions in the chat. So it was about the investment, or whether how we're going to increase the economy. Will it be like the increase of the German economy? Now, when we have calculated the expenses and the costs for example, the creation of the battery and storages, so we have divided that into the parts that might be created locally and the one that can be imported. So basically, we have considered and we've understood that half of the prices right now, out of the prices of the equipment, this is going to be for the solar panels and for the main wind converters, there's going to be the imported equipment, but the other part of the costs of the project is also made locally. So this is kind of the approach that we used for all of the issues of the investment that we have planned, and the overall modeling and macroeconomical modeling has also considered this division, that is going to be some part dedicated to the imported equipment and some is going to be produced locally. Oksana, what were the questions? Yes, the questions were, how can we get the money from? Where can we get the money? Who's going to be investing? Yes, how to get the money and where to get the money from. This is not the question that our model can help us to answer, because basically there has to be different decisions to be made. If we speak about that, if we think about our economy, then we do hope that our investors are going to be interested in investing and earning money if we say that we have carbon-less economy. So we have now been working with the electricity sector, then we've understood that we need to have the energy market that will then attract the investors to work in the market, to send the signals, the price signals and the low risk signals to the investors, to actually give them an understanding that you can work in this market is going to be the very cheap investment to do. So this is the question to the state policy and the regulations on the market and creating the good environment. So our modeling has given us the understanding that it's physically possible, it's feasible. But in order to do that, we either have to engage additional investors or we have to do the centralized planned economy if the market is incapable of doing it on their own. It has to be done by either by the state if market is incapable, or the state will create a quasi-market conditions, for example, the auction systems. And then the question will be not on how you can get the investments, and the closer we are to the market conditions, the more deregulated and more compatible, the lower the cost for the investment will be and the more investment we might get. In the auction models or in the state management and the state procurement model, we can say that the amount of investment will be slightly higher because there's going to be the more guarantees for the expenses. So who's going to pay for that? The customer. The consumer is going to be always paying. The consumer that is using the services, that's the only person that always pays. And this is quite clear, and I do not have any other answer to that.
Maybe I'll add a little bit, if I may. I mean, Alexei, you're completely right on this, like, let's say, a transparent and stable system can attract more international investors. There is a lot of money globally, and we say cheap money for renewables because a lot of, let's say, pension funds, for example, want to invest in something sustainable, but also low risk. So we see if we go to, I don't know, if we go to the Netherlands, the UK, or Germany, you see a lot of money flowing in from all over the world in renewables. What we also see is that now some of these investors it is very simple to do this and very low risk to do this in a country like UK or Germany. More investors are looking for new opportunities. So I've been working a lot recently in Romania or Greece that have big plans on renewables. So people are looking for new markets. So if there is let's say, a stable system for renewables, I think it's only a question of time to attract this. I mean, obviously, with the changes that happened in 2020 on the feed-in tariffs, etc., that is not the greatest signal for investors, but that's moving forward. There are other solutions for that. Hopefully.
Дякую дуже, Пітере.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Peter, for that. We also have an online streaming to the other networks as well. And we had one of the questions from Facebook, and the question is mostly about the slightly broader framework on how the research that we are offering for you today of whether this report is compliant to the strategy of the development of the energy sector in our overall sectoral reform. I think I can cover that because I'm a person who works in the energy policy sector. I would like to say that we are not in the power to speak on behalf of Ukrainian government, not any organization that has been included into this report is affiliated to Ukrainian government or any one of the decision makers. But from what we have seen right now, we understand that there is a big job, a big work that has been started on the big structural change in energy sector. And we currently know that there is the program of the energy sector transformation is developed, and there is the transformation of the coal sector presupposed as well. And this works follows overall trends that are currently relevant for the world. And Ukraine is trying to cope with the international trends as well in basically following the phase out of the coal usage. And I think that we can use this report to empower the change and the strategies happening and discussion happening in Ukrainian governments, because right now those policies are being developed. And of course, we're constantly contacting with the Ministry of Energy, with the Cabinet of Ministries. They currently have the Office on the Energy Transformation and Energy Transition as well. We always keeping them updated on the results of this work. But of course, we are not responsible for whether those issues in our research will be considered by the government and whether it will influence the final decision by the government and whether they will consider what we offer them in our report as well. Basically, I think our time is already over for the time of our meeting today. Unless we have some desire to have the final comments or ask the final question, we can do that. Still, we have some time. But before you're thinking and considering, so this is like the final call for all of the passengers, the final call for all of the passengers. Our plane will soon take off. So if you have the questions, you have the opportunity now to voice your questions out, or you can write them in the chat, or maybe you can already address me or address our researchers. If you have any questions, we'll be happy to communicate with you afterwards, and we'll be happy to cover all of the questions afterwards as well. We had a couple of questions in the chat. And if we will not answering that and we will not have some more new questions coming out, then we are going to be almost ready to close our event. But there still was a question about whether the European Union plans to support the transformation of the coal mines to the gas extraction. But I don't know about these plans, but actually we can ask our colleagues from Germany, but I don't know whether you can answer that. But maybe you can give us the overall outline. What are the main trends in actually finding the new usage for coal mines, and maybe they're considering any issues of transforming it for the gas production? Maybe Peter, maybe you can comment upon that.
Yes, so I think if I read the question correctly, it's about synthesis gas, or like basically hydrogen. I doubt it. I highly doubt this, because if we're considering a transition towards greener energy sources, it would not be a particularly green energy source. And as you've mentioned or alluded to, Oksana, this there is a categorization of different hydrogen products. So is hydrogen produced from fossil fuel, or is it produced from renewable energy, etc.? So this will play a big role. I think that's also something that's further down the line. The solutions and that are being and the decisions being taken now are different ones. I think some countries have hydrogen plants of their own, producing it in their countries. So I don't think it would be a big factor, but there would be big support of this. The other thing is what we've seen, we're seeing plans of using coal mines for. This is mostly open pit, so this is a bit different, but it's basically a lot of land that can be used for renewable energies relatively cheaply. That does not have a direct other usages. I know, Maren, do you want to add anything on that?
Well, at least not so much to add,
Okay.
because at least in Germany, what the coal mines are used for, or like is it's a more regional approach. So like not the coal mines or the coal plants are further used, but the whole region is like in a part of just transition and structural change program. So that means in Germany, a lot of tourism activities trying to be located there, but also to attract new investments in other industries, for instance, battery infrastructure. However, like using coal mines, there is some discussion in Germany, not mines, but coal plants, on the coal plants, like hard coal plants, on co-firing as part of the transition, that you can co-fire with biomass or even change turbines so that they can burn biomass. However, this is critical in other aspects, for instance, the availability of biomass and also the prices. But and also this is not something for the long-term view, but something more for a transition towards net zero, but not yeah, as the per se status quo then.
Thanks.
Peter, you wanted?
Nothing else to add. Thank you.
Дякую дуже.
Thank you very much. I'm really grateful to all of our speakers today. I do not see new questions coming in the chat. I don't see raised hands as well. So I think I will just get to the conclusions of our today's event. So what we were able to understand through conducting this research and conducting this work, we do not claim that we should start straight away and use it as an indicator that we can change it in a year, 2 or 5 or even 10 years. But those two scenarios that have been considered in the research that we have provided, they give us a clear understanding that under certain conditions, we can get the benefits of the energy transition. And first of all, we can receive the economical benefits. We're speaking about the risks of losing jobs in the mining sectors and in the coal generation sector, but in the same time, we say that if we will build the work for the renewable generation in the right way, if we will engage investments not only for the construction of the new power plants, but if we will also try to develop the share, for example, for equipment produced in Ukraine for the renewables, that will definitely help significantly help to stimulate the innovative economic development in Ukraine. And based on these innovations, those innovations is the one that we are emphasizing in the framework of our research. Because even if we speak about the overall planning horizon, we're planning up till 2030, the modeling has been conducted up till 2030. But that doesn't mean that after 2030, in the business as usual scenario, in the conservative scenario, there will no changes that will be happening. We understand that in the transition scenario, we have presupposed this transition up till 2030, so we will have the benefits as soon as possible. And so we will be able to mitigate the bad environmental implications. But even in this scenario business as usual, we're not closing down the coals or phasing out the coal, not just because they're very outdated or they are very dirty. It's just that we have a very good equities of producing of the energy. We understand that those costs on the update of the energy sectors will still come even in the business as usual scenario. We understand right now that empowerment of the energy transition movement will help us to save money and save costs on the subsidies that are provided to the coal industry in Ukraine. And we have also mentioned that in our report. You can take a look at that, how much money we're going to save in subsidies, how much money will be saved. But we can also see how much money will be saving by avoiding the ecological costs and environmental costs, and how much money we can save with the added costs when we speak about the coal generation. I am really, really grateful to all of the participants of our today's meetings. Thank you very much for being a part of it. We hope that we're going to be keep on in touch with you. We're going to be answering your question in the future as well. The report is available at the Heinrich Bell Foundation page. It has been shared with you in the chat, but all of the participants, all of the registered participants will have the very same link. We're going to send it to you in email for both the English and Ukrainian versions of the report, and we'll have the recording of this event as well. We're going to share it with you. Well, we'll keep on working on this topic. We're really grateful to all of the team that has been working on this research. We're really grateful to the Ecodia NGO, and we're really grateful to Aurora Energy Research, Peter Baum, Ivana Sabaka, Oleksiy Mikhailenko, Myron Tots. We had Benedict Trotz as well with us. So we had a lot of work. And I think we have been working for more than 8 months already. So basically that was a very big stage of work for us. So we're really grateful for this work had been conducted. And I do hope that this report and research is going to be useful for all of you, and you will be able to use this data in your work. Thank you very much.